I begin with a disclaimer, maybe even a warning. I have preached here once previously, and the very next day the church was shut down. And within 2 days, the whole country was shut down. Though confident I wasn't responsible for any of that, nonetheless, the memory gives me pause. I love when David preaches the stories of the Hebrew Scriptures. Some of us grew up hearing those stories, maybe the Sunday school version, maybe a pulpit version. David and Goliath, the boy of sheep and butterflies, as we have come to understand him, foolishly but boldly taking on the Philistine champion. Others of us are hearing these stories maybe for the very first time in our lives. Either way, we have, with David's help, learned to receive these tales with a grain of salt. Whereas at one time in our lives we might have unreservedly affirmed, "This is the word of the Lord." Now, with a little bit more understanding, we sometimes respond, "This is the word of the Lord." We have to dig past the surface to get to what might really be the word of the Lord for us. And when we do, we get to some of our own issues from time to time, identity and power and powerlessness, of differences, of being human with and toward other human beings, of faith and hope and endurance in the face of overwhelming odds. The king of Aram thought he had a spy in his midst. Every time he sent his troops out to wreak havoc somewhere on the Israelis, they weren't there. They were gone, or they were fully prepared. And the king said, "What's going on here?" But his counselors came to him and said, No, there's no spy in our midst. It's that prophet Elisha who tells the people of Israel what your plans are even before you speak them out loud yourself. And because of Elisha, they're always 2, 3, or more steps ahead of us. And the king said, "Enough of that. Go get this Elisha guy and bring him to me. Let's put an end to this." And when an attendant of the man of God, of Elisha, this is Elisha's, referring to Elisha's servant, when an attendant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, an army of horses and chariots was all around the city. And yet Elisha was sleeping soundly. Even with the affairs of state, no doubt, heavy on his mind, even surrounded by enemies, Elisha was sleeping. I don't know about you, I'm not sleeping so very well these days. His servant said, "Alas, master, what shall we do?" And Elisha replied, "Do not be afraid, for there are more with us than there are with them." Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." So the Lord opened the eyes of the servant, and he saw the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha, the good guys. I wish I could have my eyes opened to see that the forces of good are there in number, strong and bold and confident and committed. To see that the arc of the moral universe really is bending toward justice, still bending in that direction in spite of it all. God, give me eyes to see. It took Elisha standing there with his servant for the servant to be able to see past the forces of darkness, to be assured that rightness, that justice, that deliverance, that a sound future was still there. Alone for the servant, none of that was evident. Maybe when we're not sleeping well, maybe when we're overwhelmed, that's when we especially need one another. I've read stories this week and heard interviews of people who lived maybe much of their lives in isolation and fear until by one means or another they came out, until they found others to stand beside them, until they discovered that they were actually within the goodness of God and on the side of the goodness of God. And they poured into the streets with people of all kinds of orientations in celebration. There's a lot of talk these days about crowd size. Have you noticed that? What would happen if even a portion... The crowds are overwhelming. They're coming in the back door. What would happen if even a portion of us who were having sleepless nights over climate and climate justice, over guns and voting rights and women's rights and health care and economic justice and racial justice and immigrant rights and basic compassion and basic human dignity from one person to another, and we all poured out into the streets? Crowd size, my eye. Elisha replied, "Do not be afraid, for there are more with us than there are with them." Elisha and the Aramean army. What a fun, imaginative story. Do you suppose that if this army is suddenly struck blind, that they're still interested in pursuing this one prophet? Picture a whole army, a great army, we are told, big enough to surround a city, suddenly to a man struck blind, being led by one person what was 11 miles from Dothan to Samaria, Samaria being the capital city of Israel, northern kingdom. Got it in your mind? Whole army, all blind, one person leading them. Elijah said to them, "It's not this way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man that you seek." Which, of course, was himself, but he wasn't telling them that at the time. And he led them to Samaria. Sure he did. Can you see it happening? Elisha out there, a wild man like herding cats, hollering, "No, watch out for the tree, the rocks, don't get in the gully." And after 100 yards, they'd have all been exhausted. Fanciful for sure how he got them all to Samaria. But there's truth to be had. Make with me just a few observations about this story. First of all, we see that the king of Israel is seeking guidance of counselors around him. Rather than thinking that he alone was smarter than everyone else, that is, that he alone, without any input from anywhere else, was the one to call all the shots, this king of Israel, to his credit, was able to acknowledge that he didn't know what to do with this situation. It was beyond him. Some humility at the leadership level of the nation. And when the king of Israel saw them, this whole army now in his midst, he said to Elisha, "Shall I kill them? Shall I kill them?" The king's inclination, though apparently with some hesitation, was to wipe out this defenseless army while he had a chance. For after all, the Arameans had been causing trouble, to put it mildly, for Israel for some time. Yet the king paused. He paused, perhaps seeking other than a vengeance route, perhaps having enough sense to know that in the long run, vengeance would not serve him well, nor the nation well, that it would eventually catch up with him. Might there be some better way? "Come on, prophet," he says. "Come on, prophet, help me out here. Shall I kill them? Shall I kill them?" he asked Elisha. And Elisha answered, "No, did you capture these with a sword? Set food and water before them, so that they may eat and drink, and then let them go to their master. Let them go home." And the king got into it. To his credit, he had the courage to break out of the expected mold, out of the normal reaction that any king with the enemy army right in front of him would do. And he tried to do something different. Think how the talk radio guys and the pundits would have railed on him about being weak, being soft. But the king had caught the spirit of the vision that Elisha was offering, and he ran with it. Did you notice the sequence, how it built? Elisha said, "Set food and water before them that they may eat and drink, and let them go to their master." And the king says, "I'll one-up you on that." And he prepared for them a great feast. And after they ate and drank, he sent them on their way, and they went home. Can you picture this scene? The whole city joining in this great meal, and then I envision a parade, complete with bagpipes, or at least a high school marching band. As the locals accompanied the sight restored, wined and dined, rejoicing to be alive, no longer enemy, out of the city and on their way home, no doubt with box lunches. And the Arameans no longer came raiding into the land of Israel. The Arameans no longer came raiding into the land of Israel. There's more than one way to skin a cat, we say. I've never even skinned a cat one way. And I don't know why we say that. Maybe some of you in med school did skin a cat. But there are different ways than the usual ways. There are different ways than the expected ways. There are different ways than doing it the way it's always had to be done. Oh, to be creative. The sort of actions that might lead to a different world, where the other is not demonized, but treated humanely. Where those of different nationalities, different religions, different persuasions might be welcomed and included and valued. Oh, to be creative. Paul the Apostle wrote, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it's possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Never avenge yourselves. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Crazy, huh?